Glenn is a lonely boy who becomes a doctor to save lives after a long war against monsters. However, when he starts treating monster girls, they all fall for his Dr. Riz and want to do freaky things in exchange for his services. After the long war between humans and monsters ended, Glenn became a monster doctor in the city of Lindworm. At present, he's giving a hands-on treatment to a cowgirl.
Yeah, boy.
And after he breaks the news that she's pregnant, her bull husband comes running in to embrace her. Just then, Glenn's assistant, a snake girl named Safy, enters the room with flowers to congratulate the couple. After they leave, Safy expresses her jealousy because Glenn gets to touch monster melons every day and makes him call her by her nickname, Safy, which lifts her mood. The following day, Glenn's mentor, Dr. Tully, sends him to the arena to do a checkup on fighters. Once he gets there, he is welcomed by a bunch of fighters led by a blonde named Tazalea. When Glenn tells her he came to do their physical exam, the monster fighters question his skill because he looks like a twink. However, Tazalea asks them to mind their manners, and her Dommy Mommy Riz makes Glenn blush. Later, Glenn starts the physical checkups and asks a cat girl to sit out of the competition for a few weeks because her arm is injured. However, she climbs into his lap and asks him to inject her with his white serum, which makes Safy upset. After she pulls the catgirl away, Tazalea enters to get herself checked and reveals she's the heiress to a transportation company. She also mentions that she's looking for a macho man to do some unholy cardio with, and also hints that she's interested in Glenn, which makes Safy upset again. After they close shop for the day, Glenn is about to head home when he runs into Tazalea's attendants, Kai and Lorna. They ask him if Princess Tazalea is okay, and even when he tells them she is perfectly fine, they still look worried. They reveal that until recently Tazalea was one of the highest ranked fighters in the whole arena, but for some reason, she hasn't won a single match in a while. At night, Glenn can't sleep as he wonders what's going on with Tazalea, and Safy joins him in his study to check up on him. When he shares his worries with Safy, her heart feels warm seeing how kind Glenn is. So she gets him a drink to calm his nerves. While drinking, she asks him what could be the cause of Tazalea's downfall, and Glenn believes it might be something medicine can't fix. He also says that he wants to visit the arena to watch her match tomorrow, but Safy quickly restrains him, stating that she won't let any other girl fiddle with his joystick. Glenn assures her he's only treating Tazalea as a patient and asks her to tag along tomorrow, which finally calms her down. The following day, Tazalea loses another match and becomes depressed because she's tarnishing her family name. Refusing to accept it, she begins training hard, but suddenly stops when she sees Glenn watching her. She tells him she doesn't know why she is losing her matches, and he tells her it's because of her hooves. He offers to trim them and put horseshoes on her, but she politely refuses because of her princess pride. However, Kai and Lorna hold her down, and when she sees all the nasty equipment, she begins to panic because she's scared of pain. However, Glenn handles her expertly and finishes trimming, causing her to make dolphin noises. She finally settles down, but when she sees a horseshoe fresh out of the furnace, she starts resisting even harder than before. In the end, Safy has to restrain her with her tail, allowing Glenn to finish his job. Following day, Glenn watches as Tazalea wins all of her matches and starts thanking Glenn loudly in the arena. Glenn simply waves back at her, but this makes Safy jealous and she ends up choking him with her tail. A few years ago, Safy was brought to Glenn's family because their families were opening a co-business, and Safy was there as insurance. The contract went as planned, and after the war ended, there was no need for Safy to stay as a hostage. While sitting in her carriage, she looked over at Glenn and saw him crying because he had grown attached to her. Years later, they both met in a medical academy and started working together again. At present, Safy sees that she's run out of her sunblock, and just then, Glenn arrives and offers to take her shopping. On the way, he asked her what other snake girls did when they didn't have sunblocks, and she noted that they mostly remained nocturnal. She can't be nocturnal because her job requires her to work during the day, though she is glad Glenn looks out for her. She also notes that they haven't gone shopping in a while, and he tells her not to waste money on useless stuff. Soon after, they reach the Marrow Waterways, a transportation hub where many aquamen carry boats from one canal to another. Noticing the peaceful harmony between monsters and humans, Safy praises the councilwoman Lady Skaty, who made it all happen. After stopping at the next stop, they pack a box of essentials, and Safy immediately asks the driver to take them to a gift shop. On the way, she spots some fancy things in shops and wishes to buy everything in sight, but Glenn tells her to stop using him as a bank account. However, he notices how happy she looks and ends up letting her get whatever she wants, only for Safy to buy one small item, stating that the real gift is to spend time with him. They also learn of a mermaid show that's being held in the city, and while Safy wishes to see it, Glenn reminds her that they have a lot of work pending at home. Safy agrees to go home, but they are suddenly called out by a monster girl who mistakes them for a couple and asks them to visit her shop. Hearing this makes Safy really happy, and she insists they check out what this shop is selling. After Glenn hesitantly agrees, the girl introduces herself as Lulala and reveals that she's selling songs for copper coins. Glenn wonders if he should pay for this, but Safy gets upset thinking he was staring at Lulala's perfectly tanned body. To clear the air, Lulala tells them about the Lover's Bridge above them, which became famous after a human and a mermaid game ended themselves from it to cement their love. While Glenn calls Cap, Safy falls for the story, especially after Lulala tells them their relationship will strengthen if they listen to her love song here. Seeing how desperate Safy is to taste his sausage, the man asks for 2 songs, but Lulala argues that he's paying only for one, and he shouldn't rip her off because Lady Skaty herself is a fan of her songs. Glenn then reveals that he'll pay for the second song in the form of a checkup because he's a doctor. Lulala agrees and sings a song in her soothing voice, but when she suddenly starts coughing, Glenn immediately suspects something is wrong. She offers to start from the beginning, but Glenn tells her not to push herself and asks the driver to take them somewhere secluded so he can examine her. On there, Lulala tells Glenn she is fine, and she doesn't have money for the checkup, but he tells her not to worry about it. He then asks her to open her mouth and notices that there's some inflammation going on. He then asks to see her chest, but she quickly covers herself, thinking he's trying to diddle with her. However, he explains that he only needs to check her breathing and uses his stethoscope to conclude that there is nothing wrong with her lungs. He then asks her to show her gills and notices they're open even though she is on land, inserting his fingers inside. He notices that they've dried out after being exposed to air, which is causing inflammation, while Lulala makes happy sounds due to his inspection. Safy asks her to hold on for a little longer as it will be over soon. After the inspection is done, Glenn asks her how much time she spends on land per day, and she tells them she stays up from sunrise to sunset. Glenn anxiously tells him that although her body is adapted to land, it still needs to be mostly underwater for her to be healthy. He asks her why she's putting herself through this misery, and she tells him it's because she desperately needs money. Turns out, her dad left to get milk, leaving her siblings and her mother to fend for themselves. She is the eldest of 4 siblings, so she thinks it's her duty to work hard and help her family. She wishes to grow famous enough to be hired by the Central Hall, but Glenn tells her that at this rate, she'll fall off harder than Drake. Just then, they see a boy falling into the river, and when Glenn asks his driver to help her, the man says the current is too strong for him to handle the boat. Without thinking, Lulala jumps into the water and grabs the boy while Glenn and the others wait at the docks. Seconds later, she emerges with the boy, and while Glenn is busy doing a CPR, she loses consciousness and falls into the river. After the boy wakes up, Glenn tells the mother to take the boy to a doctor, and Safy notes that Lulala isn't anywhere to be seen. This time, Glenn himself jumps in, noting how some mermaids die underwater because they can't switch from lung breathing to gill breathing while being unconscious. Meanwhile, Lulala wakes up and realizes she can't breathe because there's water in her lungs. She accepts that she is going to die here, but just then, Glenn shows up and locks lips with her, forcing his body to switch to gill breathing. After her gills start functioning, Glenn loses her breath and is about to pass out, but Safy pulls them both out with her tail. She then scolds him for being reckless, and then asks Lulala to get off Glenn because she's jealous. A few days later, Lulala is fully healed, and the whole town gathers to hear her sing at the Central Hall. After she's done, she spots Safy and Glenn in the audience and eagerly approaches to thank them for the medicine they gave her. She also acts shy around Glenn, and Safy scolds him for locking lips with a girl, even though it was an emergency. She then starts blushing and thanks Glenn personally before swimming off, and Safy notes that she sees her as a younger sister. A few days later, Glenn treats Grandpa Max's alien girlfriend by bathing her in a bio-liquid that helps with slime regeneration, but she wants to bathe in his own bio-liquid instead. After he sees her off, Safy close shop for the day, but they interrupted when Lady Skaty herself shows up at their door. Their city, Lindworm, is fairly new, and it is the only place in the world where monsters and humans live so freely in harmony. Such quick development is unprecedented, and it's all thanks to the council rep Skaty, who is the city's most powerful person both in name and substance. Now she's at their door. Glenn nervously asks her about the purpose of her visit, and she moves her lips, but he can't hear her voice. Just then, a low-effort cosplay of a female titan walks in and introduces herself as Skaty's bodyguard and spokesperson Kunai. She immediately tells them to show Lady Skaty some respect and bow to her, and Safy whispers in Glenn's ear that Kunai is known to be a bit on the crazier side. Kunai then speaks on Skaty's behalf. stating that she lost her arm in a battle against bandits, and the location of the arm is unknown. Skaty wants them to locate the arm and reattach it to Kunai's body, but Glenn asks her how she lost it. Skaty then reveals that she was cornered by many bandits and dropped her arm in a hurry because she's an idiot. Glenn knows that Lady Skaty is a close friend of his mentor, Dr. Tully, so he doesn't understand why she visited him instead. Skaty reveals she actually went to Tully first, but was denied any assistance, and she is the one who directed Skaty to Glenn's clinic. Hearing this, Glenn asks Kunai what kind of monster she is because she's too thick to be a zombie, and Skaty reveals that Kunai is somewhat of a human. Turns out she is a flesh golem made from parts of human corpses, all thanks to a sick experiment tied to a crazy doctor in the Far East. Later, when Glenn tries to help her, Kunai strictly refuses because she hates all doctors, but Glenn gently reminds her that Lady Skaty herself requested him to help her. Even then, she says she will find her arm by herself and reattach it on her own before leaving the clinic. Afterward, Glenn and Safy discuss how crazy that doctor must have been to conduct such experiments, and despite Kunai's hate for doctors, Glenn believes it's his duty to help his patients. He packs up and decides to look for Kunai's arm, asking Safy to handle the other patients in his absence. Outside, Kunai spots a shady man and chases him to a dark alley, where she gets ambushed by him. Soon after, Glenn begins searching for Kunai's arm, but he admits he has no idea where to look. Just then, he hears a scream and rushes to find Tazalia, who points towards a severed leg on the street. Glenn casually walks up to it and starts inspecting it, noting that the cut is very old and it must belong to Kunai. Tazalia begins to panic, thinking someone got brutally murdered, but he assures her it's just Kunai's leg. Meanwhile, Kunai is dragging through the streets with half her limbs gone, and she's ashamed to face Lady Skaty in this state. As she stops to catch her breath, she suddenly feels someone diddling with her missing leg, which makes her cookie moist. On the other hand, Celia tells Glenn Kunai is a former fighter in the arena, and she holds the record for most consecutive wins, which is why it's hard to believe she lost her limbs to some ordinary bandits. Glenn then pulls out a torn stitch and notes that the leg feels alive even though it's detached from Kunai's body. Celia feels weirded out by how casually he's handling a severed leg, but he tells her it's his daily job. She also notes that if the leg feels alive, Kunai might be feeling his touch as they speak, prompting him to stop fiddling with her leg. Back in the streets, Kunai figures it must be Glenn touching her, and even she finds it weird how she can still feel sensations in her leg even though it's detached. She notes that it's the curse she has to live with, and she even hears the voices of the corpses that make up her body. Back in the city, as Glenn casually carries Kunai's leg across town, Lala suddenly appears and asks if he's trying to rebuild Frankenstein. When he tells her about Kunai, Lala reveals that she found Kunai's arm in the waterways earlier. After cleaning her parts up, he finds Kunai lying in an alley and offers to help her, despite acting like she doesn't need help. Glenn explains that her stitches were poorly done and he will reattach her body parts properly so they don't feel like they belong to someone else. Hearing this, she permits him to proceed, and Glenn stitches the blood vessels together, noting that he also comes from the Far East. Kunai reveals that her creator made it so she won't feel any pain because he thought all pain led to suffering. However, Glenn notes that she's suffering even without the pain, and it's his job as a doctor to help her. As he reattaches her nerves, he says, suffering only applies to those who are alive, and that's why she is as much alive as he is. He adds that his job is to reduce suffering, and his kind words make Kunai blush. After the arm is done, Kunai feels much better than before, but then starts blushing because he has to attach her leg next. Meanwhile, Kalag from Dark Souls 1 visits the clinic with a gift and is disappointed to learn that Glenn is not here. She asks Safy to bring that man to the pub, but when she refuses, the spider lady teases her by saying that Glenn must be pumping hose as they speak, much to Safy's frustration. Back in the alley, Kunai is making happy noises while Glenn reattaches her leg, but the man keeps it strictly professional and finishes the job. As they walk out, Kunai gets frustrated because he left her the opposite of high and dry and vows to punish him later for his shameful act. However, he also thanks her for everything he's done for her before heading back, not knowing that some bandits are keeping an eye on Glenn. That night, when the good doctor returns home and starts looking around for Safy, hearing his voice, she appears from behind a curtain with a bump on her belly, revealing that she's become pregnant. Years ago, when Glenn was separated from Safy, he started studying monsters and how they lived. Eventually, he enrolled in a medical school where he reunited with Safy, who was also under Dr. Tully's tutelage. During those years, they got close again until eventually, Glenn opened his own clinic and hired Safy as his assistant. At present, when she tells him she's pregnant, Glenn asks her to stop being Glulu because her kind lays eggs. He then leans in to see if she's hiding a balloon under her dress, but Safy reveals a basket holding an egg that she got from her friend earlier. Upon inspection, he notes that it's still unfertilized, but Safy's attention diverts to some men outside. Within seconds, the men rush into the clinic, but Safy knocks one of them out, allowing her and Glenn to escape through the back door. Safy believes these are the same men who were after Kunai, and they must have mistaken him for a threat to their plan. She believes they were trying to take Glenn hostage, but then she shows him her scary face and promises to squeeze them to death. Glenn asks her to chill out and suggests they report to Lady Skaty. But just then, Kunai arrives carrying one of the bandits and reveals she's already taken care of it. Turns out, these idiots are slave traders who are sending harpies to Epstein Island and forcing them to lay eggs so they can sell them for some cash. Glenn shows her the egg he's holding, and she confirms that this is also one of those eggs. She is certain these traffickers will come after him again if they find out about the egg, so Safy requests the council's protection. However, Kunai refuses and takes out another bandit who is trying to ambush her. She then asks them to accompany her to the waterways, and on the way, she tells them about her operation to expose these traffickers tonight. Safy reminds her that they're civilians being dragged into a government operation, but Kunai assures them that being with her is their safest option tonight. She then takes them to their boat, where they find both Lulala and Lady Skaty joining the mission. As they begin moving, Safy asks why Lulala is moving their boat and learns that she had made a deal with Lady Skaty to help her on some missions in exchange for permission to sing at the Central Hall. Glenn accuses them of taking advantage of a poor girl, and despite Kunai screaming at him not to throw shade, Skaty admits it's the truth. Kunai then explains that Lulala was the best option for this job as no one suspects her, and that she's also being paid handsomely. Glenn argues that she's not old enough to participate in such jobs, but Lulala herself asks Glenn not to worry, as she is allowed to skedaddle if things get too dicey. Seeing her resolve, Glenn finally settles down, and they proceed to the traffickers' hideout. On the way, Kunai explains that patrols have already been placed near the hideout, and they will charge from the front to create a distraction, while their squad slips in from the back. As they close in, some bandits show up on a bridge and start firing arrows at them. However, Tizelia arrives with Kai and Lorna and engages the bandits, allowing Glenn and the others to slip away. The bandit leader then gives a speech on how monsters and humans can't live together, but Tizelia doesn't buy it and smacks him down. Meanwhile, Skaty asks Lulala to leave as her job is done, but as soon as they step in, they come face to face with the ringleader of the traffickers. After exchanging some words, the leader starts fighting with Kunai, who asks Skaty and the others to head in and free the harpies. The ringleader notes that Skaty will be hurt without her protection, but Kunai argues that Skaty is a raid boss on her own. Just as the patrol at the front gate barges in, Skaty clears the way ahead until they find a room where 3 harpies are imprisoned. Glenn gently approaches them and assures them he's come to rescue, but he notices that the harpies have been losing feathers due to the poor environment and stress. He also learns that one of the harpies has been sick for a while, so he immediately starts doing his doctor things. After checking her up, he concludes that an egg has been stuck inside and they must take care of it because it's extremely painful. Soon after, he begins helping her, but the bandits barge into the room, only for Safy to thwart them with her tail. While fighting, she recalls how her mother tasked her to eliminate Glenn and his family in case the war continued, but thankfully, that never happened. She wonders if she would hurt Glenn if things didn't go well, but just then, a bandit stands her with a poisoned dagger, causing her to collapse. She then looks over at Glenn, who's still helping the harpy, and notes that he's amazing before passing out. When she wakes up, she finds herself in a council's room beside Glenn, who explains that the poison only put her to sleep because she's a lamia. He adds that he knew she would be safe, and that's why he didn't tend to her immediately, and this makes her smile. He also informs her that the traffickers have been arrested and all the harpies are safe, but Safy feels guilty about her past and informs him that she belongs to a family of assassins. Glenn tells her he already knew because his father dug into their family before starting a business with them, and this leaves Safy flabbergasted. Glenn further reveals that his own family had the same idea to assassinate her, and one of their servants even poisoned her food once without telling them. That was the first time he became interested in medicine and did everything he could to heal her. Hearing this, Safy's sprinkler goes off, and she quickly pins him down to the bed to show him what that snake tongue can do. Before things get too heated, she suddenly collapses again, and Glenn reveals the poison is still in her system. After that, she hides herself under the blanket, and when Glenn tells her to rest, she asks him to hold her tail so she can feel safe. A few days later, Glenn and Safy used Tazelia's transportation service to head to the Harpies' village. Turns out, Tully asked them to visit the village and check up on the Harpies, and Safy is a little annoyed because they had to close shop. Glenn also admits he was a little surprised by it, but he is also curious to know how that Harpy is doing. Safy learns she was taken back to her village, but she has no family, and she can't even fly because she's lost too many feathers. Just then, their carriage stops because Tazelia is too exhausted from such a long ride, but she is determined to go on because she wants the ugly doctor to tie her up with his stethoscope. Soon after, they climb a rocky terrain and are suddenly hit by a landslide, but Kai and Lorna jump on Tazelia to protect her. Glenn and Safy rush outside to make sure they're okay, and while Tazelia and Lorna seem fine, Kai seems to have been injured by the landslide. As Glenn examines her, he learns that she's fractured her leg, and Tazelia tears up because she thinks it's her fault. Just then, a bunch of male Harpies arrive to guide them, and when they see Kai has been injured, they offer to carry her to the village. After a short trip, the whole squad arrives at the village, and when Safy feels a little cold, Glenn gives her his coat, which makes her blush. Just then, a dwarf Harpy with a face not even a mother can love arrives and introduces himself as the village chief. He reveals Kai has been sent to the guest house, so while Tazelia stays back to discuss business with the chief, Glenn goes to check on Kai. Once there, Glenn is relieved to learn that her leg is not fractured but sprained and asks her to rest. Kai insists on helping Tazelia, but when she fails to stand up, Lorna promises to do double the work until she fully recovers. After that, Glenn sets up shop at the village, and a huge line of Harpies forms outside. After a while, the female Harpies he saved appear at the window to personally thank Glenn, which makes Safy jealous. Glenn notices that Illy, the one he treated, did not come with them because she didn't want to see him. Later, Glenn goes on a walk and finds Lorna standing all alone by the river. When he asks why she's here, he learns that she zoned out and got separated from Tazelia. Lorna asks how Kai is doing, and he tells her she's resting before asking her how she and Kai are related. Lorna reveals they're both war orphans who were raised to become attendants, and Lady Tazelia took them in when they were younger. Just then, Tazelia shows up and anxiously mentions to Lorna that she's been zoning out all day, but Lorna doesn't seem to buy it. At night, Tazelia takes the matter to Glenn, revealing how Lorna has been acting weirdly ever since they stepped into this village. She also mentions that Lorna started saying random things when they met with the village chief, prompting Safy to ask what the meeting was about. Tazelia reveals that she's thinking of expanding her transport business by hiring Harpies for the speed delivery of packages, but both her attendants are out of action. She asks Glenn to examine Lorna as well, but Glenn asks her to give Lorna some time because she may just be worried about Kai. However, Tazelia gets anxious because she can't do jack without her attendants, so she bribes them with 10 bottles of the finest wine available. Safy immediately accepts the bribe, and after Tazelia mentions that she and her attendants are like sisters, Glenn agrees to help. That night, Glenn scratches his head over how he can help Lorna because the main issue is that she's stressing over Kai's injury. Just then, Safy tells her that centaurs undergo harsh training to become who they are, and Glenn decides to train Lorna by himself. Following day, he puts a blindfold on her and lets her be alone with her thoughts, and this helps ease her mind a little. After that, he ties her up like a hoe and pulls her back,
Yeah, boy.
making Tazelia wonder if he's Johnny Sins kind of doctor. In reality, he's just helping her realign her bones, which in turn makes Lorna even more relaxed. Safy finds this method quite strange, and Glenn says it works so well because Lorna actually likes being tied up, seeing her finally be herself. Tazelia embraces Lorna and says she loves both of them a lot and wishes nothing but happiness to them. Safy then asks Glenn if Lorna will attend to Tazelia in her current state, but Lorna says she will do anything for her lady. Later, Lorna meets Kai, who asks why she's all tied up, and Lorna mischievously says it's all thanks to the good doctor. Hearing this, Kai suddenly starts acting sussy and talks about paying Glenn with something money can't buy. Before he can say anything, both girls pin him between their jugs and explain that in their culture, attendants are shared between husband and wife. They want Glenn to marry Tazelia so they can get some of that fired, and to convince him, they want to offer him a teaser before the full experience. However, Glenn proves himself to be a wuss by running off, but the girls promise him that they will make him marry Tazelia so they can give him horseback rides. A few days later, Kai fully recovers from her injury thanks to Glenn's treatment, and all that's left to do is to examine Illy, since she's refusing to see Glenn. He wonders if he did something wrong, but Tazelia reveals she has something to tell him. Later, She reveals that Illy is requesting to see her instead of Glenn, but she's confused because she has never met Illy before. Soon after, they reach her cabin, and Glenn knocks on the door before stepping into a floor littered with her feathers. He finds Illy cowering in the corner of the room, and while others helped clean up the place, Glenn tried to talk to her. Even though Illy started acting like a tsundere, Glenn handled her expertly, and she allowed him to check her feathers. He notices that the colors aren't as vibrant and the length is pretty too, which tells him that she's a great flyer. When he tries touching them, Illy starts to feel immense pain, but pushes through it as Glenn pulls one of her feathers. He then proceeds to touch her head, after which he suddenly sticks his hands into her underarms. Illy is caught off guard and screams, and Glenn tells her to relax because he's only taking her temperature. After she lets him do it, he concludes that her temperature seems fine right before Safy pulls him in and reminds him to be gentler with girls. She then throws him back down, and Glenn collects himself to reveal that Illy has no sickness and she's just molting. As he's explaining how shedding works, Illy screams that he's lying because whenever she molted before, she was able to fly perfectly fine. Glenn tries to calm the psycho shoddy down, but she starts stomping on the floor and tells all of them to leave her. Once again, Glenn tries to reason with her, but she loses her temper and attacks him, only for Tzelia to block her. She then asks Illy to apologize, but she instead barges out of the cabin and leaves everyone worried for her. Glenn suggests they follow her because she's a bigger idiot than she looks, but Tzelia asks him to let her hand it. Later, she finds Illy by the river, and as she approaches, Illy tells her she's a big fan of hers and watches all her matches in the arena. She also reveals that she wants to be a cool fighter like her, but Tzelia explains that the arena is not for brats like her. However, Illy says she grew up in the slums and knows how to fight, but Tzelia explains that fighting is not the only thing she needs in the arena. When Illy pays no heed to her words, she picks up a stick and challenges the stupid bird to a fight. Tzelia lectures her about discipline and respect, both of which she lacks, before starting the fight. Soon after, Tzelia finds himself getting her wound treated by Glenn, revealing that she beat the living bejesus out of Illy, but the bird managed to smack her in the face. Safy asks why she felt the need to fight her, and Tzelia says she couldn't tolerate Lily disrespecting Glenn after he tried to help her. Safy understands the sentiment and says she's been imagining 100 ways to torture Illy, but Glenn asks her to chill because they need to help her. Tzelia then reveals that after she beat Illy up, she asked her to quit being a fighter and live here in this peaceful village. However, the girl insisted that she didn't belong here, and that's when Tzelia realized that she was facing some internal issues. She then gives Glenn one of Illy's flight feathers that she lost during the battle, and Glenn immediately realizes what's wrong with it. The following day, Tzelia goes around the village and collects all the feathers that matched Illy's, hoping that Glenn would solve her case and she'd find a place where she belongs. Just as they start chatting, Safy suddenly arrives with a basket full of all the feathers she could find in the village, clearly jealous that Glenn is getting closer to another monster girl. As she turns to leave, Tzelia asks Glenn to pay some attention to Safy as well, and he realizes she's right when he hears her sneeze. Just then, a villager informs them that Illy has left the village, so Glenn heads out immediately to look for her. That night, Illy stands in a tree as she recalls how free she felt when she could fly, but because of her molting, she feels trapped and unable to take wing. She also recalls Tzelia telling her that she can't fly forever and must land one day, but Illy tears up because she doesn't know where she belongs. Meanwhile, Glenn and the others are searching for her all over the place, and Safy uses literal wall hacks to spot her. As they walk up to her, she starts throwing a fit and asks Glenn why he's gathering her feathers like a creep. Glenn promises that he's not gooning to them and only use them to examine her condition. He then reveals that this molting of hers is different than her previous ones because she's now growing her adult feathers. Turns out, she has the blood of the phoenix in her, and once her transition completes, she will grow fiery wings and will be able to fly higher than she ever has before. Turns out, this was all planned by Dr. Tully, who wanted to test Glenn by giving her a patient who needed emotional treatment rather than medical. A few days later, Illy's phoenix wings begin to develop, and she happily shows them to Glenn, prompting him to ask why she was so hesitant around him at first. She admits it's because she felt shy around him after he saw her lay eggs. Embarrassed, she runs off to show her new wings to her friends, and Glenn says he didn't need to do anything for her. However, Safy believes otherwise because his kindness helped Illy go through a tough period. Just then, they see Illy fly high, and one of her feathers drops into Glenn's hands. He quickly lets it go, claiming it's hot, but he concludes that the flame of the phoenix still burns strong within Illy. Later that day, Glenn demonstrates to Harpies how to bathe because these nasty freaks smell like peanut butter. However, the girls start getting moist and swarm him, so he can bathe them too. After he escapes to the clinic, Safy notes that they can now return to Lindworm, and Glenn agrees to leave quickly because he must have patients waiting in the city. Just then, Illy flies in from the window while looking like someone gave her a nut tribute and reveals that she got entangled when flying through the forest. Glenn inspects the white stuff and realizes it's silk from an arachne, a monster whose lower half is that of a spider. He asks Illy to wash herself in the spring as hot water washes this stuff off, and she immediately flies out of the window. She returns to ask Glenn if he'd like to join her, but Safy strictly tells her to scatter. She then tells Glenn to stop grinning like a creep, and he anxiously says he is just happy to see Illy doing well. Soon after, more Harpies show up looking like they'd been to a freaky party and ask Glenn to help them. He tells them to wash off with warm water, but he is also curious to get to the root of the problem. Later, he heads out to the forest with Safy to locate the arachne. But when he starts to lose his breath, Safy helps him climb up. As they go deeper, they find traces of Arachne's presence and decide to follow a trail of webs to locate her. On the way, Safy asks him to be careful because arachnes are best at making traps, but he tells him he'll be fine. Just then, he steps into one of the traps, and Safy knows Arachne would know the trap was triggered through their web. Within seconds, a busty spider girl with ample jugs drops in, and Safy immediately recognizes her as Arania. She asks Safy what she's doing so deep into the mountains and learns that they both came to treat Harpies in the village. She then walks up to Glenn and introduces herself as Safy's best friend, and Safy adds that they got closer as she would often order silk clothes from Arania. Glenn also learns that Arania is a lead designer at a famous clothing brand, and all of Safy's clothes are designed by her. When Glenn introduces himself, Arania reveals she's heard all about him from Safy. Glenn then asks why she's here, and she reveals she's looking for a harpy that has phoenix feathers. Apparently, she thinks phoenix wings change color every time they are flapped, and she wants to make that a part of a design. She adds that she laid traps all over the forest to catch them, but they tell Arania that the harpy she's looking for lives in the village, causing her to scream because she wasted her time setting all those traps. Soon after, they take Arania to the village, and she immediately starts pestering Illy to show her wings. However, Illy gets weirded out and tells her to leave her alone. Meanwhile, Tissalia is practicing her swings in the forest when Illy suddenly zooms past her because she's being chased by Arania. Soon after, as Glenn and Safy are sitting by the river, Tissalia arrives covered in Arania's web and starts complaining about being ambushed by a monster. When Safy says that the monster is her best friend, Tissalia starts arguing with her instead, but Safy assures her that Arania is a good person who sometimes becomes reckless. When Tissalia calls Arania dangerous, Glenn tries to calm the ladies, but Safy gets offended for her friend and leaves. Tissalia wonders if Safy is not feeling well, and Glenn admits cold-blooded monsters like her can't handle lower temperatures well. Tissalia also notes that Safy has been working extra hard here, and even calls Glenn an idiot for paying attention to someone closest to him. That night, Glenn asks Safy to take a break because Kai and Lorna have invited her to relax at the hot springs. At first, Safy is unsure, but when he tells her to accept it as a present from him, she agrees to take the day off. Following day, while the girls chill at the hot spring, Glenn is in his clinic when Arania suddenly visits him to reveal that her head feels fuzzy and that her joints aren't working too well either. Glenn places his hand on her forehead to see that she doesn't have a fever, so he makes her open her mouth to see if she has any throat infection. With no signs of infection, he concludes that Arania is coming down with a cold and starts prescribing her meds. Arania keeps glaring at him, and when he asks what's up, she says she's just admiring a cutie pie like him, looking after monster girls. She adds that Safy always talked about a doctor she worked with, and now, seeing him in person. Arania understands why Safy wants to fiddle with his joystick. After that, she decides to go for a walk, and even when Glenn asks her to rest, she refuses to listen. In the end, Glenn ends up joining her, but when he sees that Arania is fine, he decides to head home. However, he triggers one of her traps, and as he hangs upside down, she reveals that she laid them all over the forest to prevent him from leaving. She also reveals that she was lying when she said she was sick and pulls out a pair of scissors, stating that it's time to have some fun. She then reveals she is very curious to know why Safy likes him, which is why she's gonna taste some of his baby gravy as a test. Before she can lay a hand on him, Tissalia suddenly arrives and rescues him, as she scolds Arania for being selfish. She tells Tissalia she's the same as her because she also wants Glenn as the heir to her family business. Tissalia admits she loves the doctor, but will never use him for her own benefit. But Arania calls Cap and gets under her skin, which starts a brawl between them. Tizelia is determined to prove that her love for Glenn is pure, while Glenn is wondering how he can stop these two from fighting. Just then, Safy arrives and scolds them both for trying to use Glenn, and Glenn notices that her eyes have gone red because she's angry. In her anger, she ends up squeezing Glenn too hard, and the man passes out. That night, Glenn joins Safy over a drink and confesses that she's in love with him. Much to his shock, she chugs down another glass and laments over how everyone is trying to steal him from her, and she's scared she might lose him soon. After patiently listening to her, Glenn tells her that despite everyone trying to taste his sausage, she is the only one with whom he will drink. Hearing this makes Safy blush hard, but their moment is interrupted when they hear rumbling. As they run outside, the chief tells them their village was attacked by an evil giant named Gegas many centuries ago, but the god sealed him. However, the seal seems to have been broken because the scouts have spotted a large creature heading in their direction. Soon after, the whole village gathers to wonder what to do next, but when the rumbling gets worse, panic begins to set in among them. In that moment, Tizelia steps up to calm everyone down and asks Illy to inform Lady Skaty because she's the fastest flyer in the village. She then asks those villagers who can fly to head to Lindworm shortly and tells her attendants to prepare the carriage. She also urges Arania to help out by using her silk to package everyone's belongings, and the others watch in awe as she handles this situation well. Tizelia then turns to Glenn and asks him to take care of those harpies who can't fly, and with that, everyone scatters to perform their own duties. As Arania packs up the belongings, Glenn heads to his clinic to check up on one last patient before they set off. As he packs up, the village is hit with another rumbling, but Safy luckily carries all the bottles on his shelf. With that, he heads outside to see everyone already leaving, but Tizelia is nowhere to be seen. Safy also hasn't seen Tizelia anywhere, and this makes them wonder if she went alone to face Gegas. Meanwhile, Tizelia is indeed on her way to face the giant. Knowing that someone had to stay back to give others time to escape, she deems herself the perfect candidate for this job. And even though she knows she doesn't have a chance to survive, she would propose to Glenn if she did by some miracle. Just then, Safy shows up and scolds her for being an idiot, but Tizelia says it's her job to protect others. However, Safy notices that her ears are trembling, and it's obvious that she's soiling her pants. Soon after, Glenn shows up as well, stating that he cannot let one of her patients risk her life while he stands by idly. Even then, Tizelia says she won't turn back as someone must stay here to stall the giant, and Safy reveals they came here not to stop her, but rather help her because she's stubborn. This starts another stupid argument between the girls, but Glenn calms them down and reveals that he has a plan. He explains that he's going to dissuade the giant from coming to the village, and Safy notes that he won't turn back either because he's also very stubborn. Tizelia has massive respect for the doctor, so she agrees to follow his plan, but if the negotiations fail, she is prepared to fight the giant. Safy is also prepared with a poisonous dagger that will at least knock the giant out, and that's when Tizelia will strike Gegas down. As they move ahead, it starts to snow, and Safy begins feeling cold. Just then, they come face to face with the green-haired giant, and without hesitation, Glenn tells her that the villagers are terrified of her. He also asks if they did anything to anger her, but the giant suddenly sneezes and sends him flying into Safy's arms. She then reveals that she was feeling sick and learned that there was a doctor in the village, which is why she came down the mountain. Meanwhile, Illy breaks into Lady Skaty's chambers, where she tells them that a giant god is waging war on the Harpies' village. However, Lady Skaty herself assures Illy that the giant won't harm anyone, and her name is Dion. The following day, as the Harpies return to their village, Glenn conducts a checkup on Dion, asking her to stick her tongue out for him. He then examines her throat to conclude that she has a cold, and she says she's been feeling sick for 10 years, which is around the time Lindworm came to be. She also adds that she met Lady Skaty 10 years ago and thought she could get better just from some rest, but that wasn't the case. Glenn then steps off to get her some meds, but he ends up tumbling into her bouncy castle. As he gets some footing, he accidentally slips into the Grand Canyon, but Dion manages to pull him out, right before accidentally dropping him back inside. Later, Dion takes her medicine and apologizes to the Harpies for scaring them off, stating that she was avoiding the forest route because she didn't want to squish any wildlife. Meanwhile, Safy watches from a distance and asks Glenn if a normal herbal medicine would work on her. Glenn says it will because she's a normal monster except for her big size. Just then, the village chief arrives and apologizes because everything he knew about the giant was wrong, and she's actually very kind. Glenn wants to make sure Dion does not return to the village again, so Safy takes him to Arania, who offers to make warm clothes for the giant. After a while, Dion tries out her new clothes and ends up looking like Santa Claus. With her issue resolved, Safy tells Glenn they should head back to Lindworm and open their clinic. A few days later, Glenn is in his study when Illy suddenly shows up with a letter from the Central Council. At night, he invites Tzelia to dinner and tells him that Illy has started working with her company, and she came to deliver him an invitation to the Marrow Waterways commemoration ceremony. Tzelia says he's happy to have Illy in her team because she's been super happy ever since she has had this job. To show his appreciation, Glenn asks him to eat as much as she likes and also thanks her for everything she did for the villagers. Tzelia suddenly gets hyped and says she was willing to risk her life for him, but now she feels stupid because that was super unnecessary. Just then, Safy starts mocking her for being a doo-doo head, but Tzelia asks her to stay quiet because she is only allowed to observe them. Safy then sincerely praises her for showing tremendous courage, admitting that she would have packed up and run away if she were in her shoes. She also adds that she has massive respect for Tzelia, but when Tzelia asks if she would let her have a private dinner with Glenn, Safy strictly refuses because she can't let him fall for anyone but herself. This starts a friendly rivalry between the two, and when Glenn notes that they seem to be getting along, they quickly say no before laughing. The next day, the duo heads to the ceremony, where they run into Kunai and Skaty. Lulala and Arania are also there because they'll be singing and designing clothes for the mermaids, respectively. Lady Skaty thanks everyone for making it happen and offers a special thanks to Glenn, who notices her golden tail and feels amazed. Later, the ceremony begins with a few words from Lady Skaty, who reveals she named this city Lindworm after a mighty dragon that soars the skies. She also thwarts the rumors about her wanting to take over the city, making it clear that it is a haven for both humans and monsters. She then proceeds to share her plans regarding the future of this city, but before she can get a word out, she suddenly collapses. A few hours later, Glenn and Safy are in the royal palace, discussing how everyone is worried about Lady Skaty because she's a central figure in the city. Safy then asks why no one is giving them an update even though they were the first ones to tend to her. And Glenn says it's fine because Dr. Tully herself is tending to Skaty, since they're on their way to meet them. Safy asks Glenn to be careful around that psycho, but Glenn assures her Tully is not interested in him anymore. Minutes later, they knock on the door, and contrary to his belief, Tully immediately pulls him in and starts gushing over him. Glenn tries to deal with it calmly, but Safy tells Tully she's a horrible mentor and demands that she let Glenn go. Tully just smiles at her as she tells her to leave the room, prompting Safy to try and free him manually. When that fails, Tully lets Glenn go and says she missed her sassy little students, but Safy doesn't hesitate to tell her they didn't miss her at all. This reignites an old rivalry between the two of them, but after their shenanigans, Tully sincerely thanks them for giving first aid to Skaty. Glenn asks her what happened to Skaty, and Tully sadly tells them that although she can't reveal classified info, she can still tell them that Skaty isn't doing so well. Turns out, Skaty is facing a rare illness that has already spread throughout her body, and it's a miracle she's been going on for so long without showing any weakness. Tully also mentions that Skaty is experiencing terrible fluctuations in her blood pressure, which can easily lead to heart failure. She also says that dragons are hard to treat because they're very resilient to even the deadliest of illnesses, but that only increases their suffering. Even someone like Tully is biting her nails because, even though she knows the root of the problem, she can't do much because Skaty is refusing all treatments. When Safy asks her to explain, she says she's already told them too much and tells them to go home. On their way back, Safy notes that Tully has her hands full, but then recalls she's got plenty more because she's half octopus. Later that day, Glenn is tending to Kunai, who confirms that Lady Skaty has refused all treatment and would resume her duties as usual. She cannot sit and watch her lady suffer every day, so she vows to do something about it, even if it means defying Skaty's order. She then asks Glenn to treat Lady Skaty, even if it means overstepping her mentor Tully. Glenn assures her Tully won't mind it and agrees to examine her, asking Kunai to make the arrangements for his visit. When Kunai says he'll have to come to Skaty's chambers, Safy suddenly starts acting weird, but things go from bad to worse when Kunai suggests they remove Skaty's plot armor for an easier checkup. Seeing her freak out, Glenn assures her that this is purely professional, and Safy copes by telling herself that nothing sussy will happen. That night, Kunai takes them to the palace, but when they reach Skaty's chambers, she says that only Glenn is allowed to go on from here. Once Glenn steps inside, he finds Skaty at the window, and she asks him to come closer so she can talk to him. Once he does, she speaks to him directly for the first time, and this puts a smile on his face. He gently tells her he came here to examine her because Kunai asked, and Skaty feels sad for worrying her. She also says she will scold Kunai for doing this, but since Glenn is already here, she might as well let him do his job. She then opens her jacket to reveal a blue blob beating like it's about to explode, and Glenn asks for permission to examine her. After she permits him, she reveals that this blob is a malignant tumor that is slowly taking over all the veins in her body and is acting as a second heart. She believes this was bound to happen because dragons don't belong on Earth, and when her ancestors came here, their bodies went through several transformations, including a humanoid one. Centuries later, the dragons have lost their original drake form, and she believes she is being punished because of the war between humans and monsters. Meanwhile, Glenn ignores her yapping and continues to examine her scales and her tail, causing her to make happy noises. She tries her best to hold back, but when Glenn starts touching her wings, she gets weak in the knees and starts crying. Just then, Kunai and Safy barge in, and thinking Glenn is trying to inject Skaty with something other than a needle, they decide to give him a vasectomy. However, Skaty tells them she's fine and now wants to rest, leaving Glenn confused. The next day, Glenn asks for Tully's help in performing surgery on Skaty, but Tully gets worked up because she's tried many times to help Skaty, but Skaty only wants to die. After calming down, she grabs Glenn's hands and gently asks if he can try to convince her, and Glenn assures her that he can. Tully then reveals that it will be impossible even with the three of them, and they will need one more person who is an expert in stitching. Hearing this, Glenn visits Arahia and tries to convince her to help, but she refuses, saying it's too much for her to handle. Glenn promises to take all responsibility if things go wrong, but Arahia still refuses because she is worried about what others will think of her. However, when Safy tells her she will be matching outfits with her girly instincts kick in, and she immediately accepts. Afterward, Glenn tells Safy that they still have to convince Skaty to accept their help, and she promises to stay with him no matter what happens. Meanwhile, Kunai approaches Skaty to ask how she's feeling, and Skaty tells her it's the usual. Kunai anxiously begs her to get surgery, adding that Tully and Glenn are both trustworthy, but Skaty calmly tells her she's already accepted her fate. Meanwhile, Glenn visits a weapons shop to see a one-eyed cyclops named Mermaid, but Glenn is so ugly that she falls out of her chair. After settling down, she explains she's scared of people with one eye, even though it's very common. As they walk together, Glenn asks her how she is, and she says she's having trouble doing most things because she has problems with depth perception. Just then, she bumps into someone and falls into Glenn's arms.
Yeah, boy.
But she gets embarrassed and quickly backs off. This causes her coat to tear up and expose her cakes, and Glenn gets a slap on the face for just existing. Later, as Mermaid takes him to the boss, she starts to cry, claiming no one would marry her because he saw her dumpy. Once they reach the boss, Glenn tells him he needs to perform surgery on Lady Skaty and wants the tools prepared within a month. The boss promises to do everything in his power to deliver, but he also admits it's gonna be nearly impossible to make small needles strong enough to get through dragon scales. He then asks Mermaid if she wants to try to make the needles, but Mermaid panics, thinking she's not good enough for such an important job. When boss tries to encourage her, she anxiously claims he just wants to put all the blame on her if the surgery fails, which will ruin her life. However, the boss tells her to stop yapping and just do it, and she hesitantly accepts the job. Later, he helps Arahia practice stitching on Kunai because Kunai doesn't feel any pain. Arahia then asks Safy to get her some booze because she's tired, but Safy strictly. Kunai then reveals that Skaty still hasn't agreed to the surgery because she despises her long history of war with humans and wanted to create a world where everyone could live in peace. Now that her mission is complete, she believes her illness is fate, but Glenn is sure she will come around if they push hard enough. However, Arahia notes that Skaty might push them away even more if they keep telling her the same thing, which is why she suggests Glenn uses his Rizzler energy on Skaty as he did with Safy. This makes Safy turn red, and she chases Arahia out of the room. Later, Glenn takes Tully to the weapons shop, where they are shown the prototypes of the tools they requested. Tully uses them on her own tentacles and approves them, asking the boss to mass-produce them. Glenn also notices some curved needles that Mermaid has been trying to make, but she's having trouble coming up with something usable. Glenn recalls how her first major surgery was also pretty hard on him, so he understands what Mermaid is going through and wishes to help her. However, the boss suggests they let her figure this one out on her own because it will help regain her confidence. Meanwhile, Mermaid is still working when she looks at one of the machines and finally gets an idea. Later, Illy knocks on Glenn's window and informs him that there has been an emergency at the weapons shop. Glenn rushes there with Safy and finds Mermaid passed out on the floor and immediately cuts off her top to help her breathe. He realizes she's had a heat stroke due to working in the heat and asks the others to put her somewhere cool. Meanwhile, Mermaid recalls how she used to make weapons for war that would take lives. But then Skaty came and asked them to make medical tools that would save lives instead. This gave Mermaid a new purpose in life, and now that she had a chance to pay Skaty back, she overworked herself until she got sick. When she regains consciousness, she immediately tries to get up, but Glenn is by her side and asks her to keep resting. She then looks at her chest and realizes her melons are on full display, and Glenn tells her he had to cut open her top because it was an emergency. Mermaid is so embarrassed that she hides herself under the blanket because he saw both her cakes and peaches. Just then, Arania hands her a new top so she can cover herself before sternly telling Glenn to be more careful around girls. After that, Glenn conducts a proper exam on her and concludes that she's just tipsy because of motion sickness. She then explains what she has been doing all this time, and Glenn asks her to show them. Soon after, they head back to the workshop, where the boss apologizes for pushing her too hard and promises to create the needles on his own. However, Glenn tells him Mermaid has already figured it out, so she takes them to her workplace, where she excitedly shows how she created the needles. In her excitement, she gets super close to Glenn, but suddenly blushes and takes 15 steps back. After that, Glenn and Arania inspect the needles and approve their design, and boss tears up seeing her pupil succeed. That evening, the squad is about to leave when Mermaid thanks Glenn for letting her take this job, and he tells the girl to keep her head high. She says she can't do that because she has weird eyebrows, but when Glenn tells her they're just fine, she calls him a diddler and runs off in embarrassment. The following day, Glenn is teaching Arania how to stitch, but Safy gets jealous seeing them getting close and distracts Glenn by reminding him that he has to visit the central hospital. Immediately, Glenn packs up his stuff and asks Arania and Safy to hold down the fort while he heads off to convince Lady Skaty. After he leaves, Arania tells Safy that she must confess her feelings towards Glenn in simpler terms, or that idiot will never catch on to her hints. Safy tells her it's fine this way as well, recalling how she and Glenn were separated many years ago, and she thought she'd never see him again. However, fate brought them together again, and no matter what happens now, he always comes back to her at the end of the day. That night, Arania goes to dinner with Safy, who also invites Tazalia because it is a girls' night out. As tensions grow between Arania and Tazalia, Safy calms things down by noting that there are no records of surgeries on dragons, and they use Tazalia's connections to find a drug that is strong enough to be used as an anesthetic. Arania gets intrigued to learn that it's kind of an alcohol, so she orders multiple pegs for herself to distract her from drinking too much. Tazalia asks if she can tell the difference between real and fake love, but Arania says she only cares about getting back shots, and everything else is just an added benefit. She also adds that she can turn into a sister for girls who are close to her, and this makes Safy blush. Later that night, Safy finds Arania trying to steal a dragon scale from Glenn's office, and Safy declares that she can't let anyone have it because it's a precious gift she gave to him. Caught in the act, Arania throws it in the air and escapes from the window, but Tazalia is waiting for her outside. Safy also blocks her from the back, and she's forced to give in. They head inside, where Safy says she was noticing weird things about Arania, and she already knew he was up to something. Now, she's figured out that Arania is scared she would be left with no friends if Safy and Glenn got together, so she has started acting up to get attention. Hearing this, Tazalia tells her that she's never doubted her friendship with Kai and Warna because it's based on love and trust, and if Arania doesn't trust her own friends, she will never experience the joy of having friends. Safy also adds that she doesn't need to worry because the two of them will always be best friends, and this makes Arania tear up. After she calms down, she reveals that she was stealing the dragon scale because she wanted to test her bond with Glenn. Because so far he's been so kind it seems unbelievable. Despite that, she can't bring herself to trust Glenn and wants to know what dark secrets he's hiding. She feels weird knowing that Glenn is uncomfortable around her, yet he never makes her feel awkward, which drives her to insanity. Finally, understanding her issue, Safy asks her a few questions about Glenn, and her answers make both Safy and Tazalia giggle. Arania starts getting annoyed and asks them why they're laughing at her, and they finally tell her that just like them, she has fallen in love with the doctor. The next day, Glenn finds Skaty alone on a watchtower, looking over the city she's built. He tells her he won't give up until she agrees to the surgery, but she asks him to lift her so she can have a better view. In his arms, Skaty reveals that she has always hated wars and wanted to build a place where everyone could live peacefully. She descended from the heavens and spent so much time working towards her goal that she turned into a half-human, and now she can't have her original dragon form or return to the heavens. However, she is happy she managed to create the city of Lindworm, where everyone lives together, and now it's time for her to rest. Hearing her story, Glenn believes that she's giving up because she feels guilty and reminds her how everyone is working super hard to make this surgery a success. He also adds that the city is growing even more, and she should be here to watch over the people. Skaty hesitantly asks if it's really okay for her to live now that she's done everything she wanted, and Glenn assures her that it is because people still need her, She adds that it's quite boring to live such a long life, and she doesn't know what she should do to pass the time. Glenn says she should try new and delicious foods, and Skaty wishes to visit a new cafe that opened in the waterways. Glenn also asks her to buy some jewels and wear them, and Skaty admits she really likes jewels. She asks Glenn what normal girls do, and Glenn hesitantly tells her that they fall in love. Hearing this, Skaty promises to consider her options and ask him to put her down now. Once he does, she bows to thank him and agrees to go through with the surgery. Soon after, the difficult procedure begins, and the entire city comes to a pause as they wait for her to get better. During the process, Skaty's unconscious body detects danger and suddenly heats up to protect her, so Tully asks Safy and Arania to step back, and she and Glenn handle the rest. Despite burning her own tentacles, Tully bears through the pain and guides Glenn through the entire process. A few days later, Skaty appears before her people, apologizing for scaring them off, and promises to continue performing her duties. After the speech, Kunai expresses her delight to see Skaty use her own voice, though she also feels sad that she won't be her spokesperson anymore. Skaty then admits that she was blinded by her own wishes before, but Glenn made her realize that there's so much to see in this world, and she should spend time learning about the city she created. She then learns that Glenn couldn't make it because she's tending to a sick Safy, so she decides to visit him herself. Before leaving, she asks Kunai if it's okay for her to do what makes her happy, and Kunai assures her that it is. Meanwhile, Glenn is helping Safy warm up, but he notices that he's acting weird, so he asks her to open her mouth. Safy starts to get moist as he runs his fingers through her mouth. He then asks her to stick her tongue out, and when she does, he finally finds the issue. He then holds it in his hands and applies honey to it to soothe the pain, and this makes Safy combust. After he's done, she gets embarrassed and hides herself under the blanket, so Glenn decides to give her some space. As he steps out, he finds Skaty and Kunai watching as their driver fixes the broken carriage. When he approaches them, Skaty immediately hugs Glenn and asks if he wants to go somewhere private. Glenn has to turn her down because he has to look after a patient, and Kunai immediately pulls Skaty back, asking why she's acting so clingy with Glenn. Skaty casually opens her robe to show that Glenn healed her, and Kunai quickly covers her up. When Glenn asks her to button up, Skaty tells him to do it for her and even asks him to spend time with her once he's free. Kunai tells Skaty that she shouldn't act so freely because she's still the councilwoman of the city, and this makes her sad. Just then, Mermaid passes by and notices that Skaty's carriage is broken, so she offers to help fix it. Moments later, the carriage is as good as new, and Skaty holds Mermaid's hand, thanking her for saving her again. She knows Mermaid had a huge part to play in making the surgery successful, so she gifts her and Glenn a huge barrel of wine. Since Glenn has a house call pending, he asks Mermaid to watch over his barrel and runs off, leaving her in panic. Back in the clinic, Arania starts to get freaky with Safy, but in reality, she's practicing so she can later perform her tricks on Glenn. After a bit, Glenn returns to Mermaid, who starts complaining that he left her alone, but Glenn reveals he brought Tessalia and her girls to transport the barrels. As they head home, Tessalia suddenly starts talking about getting engaged to Glenn, but when he says he isn't interested, she believes he's only saying no because he's scared of Safy. Back at the clinic, Safy worries for him because he still hasn't returned home, and Arania starts teasing her by saying that he must be rizzing other monster baddies in the city. Just then, Illy knocks on their window and brings a huge amount of fruits and vegetables as a thank you to Glenn for everything he's done for the village. As they're talking, Glenn returns home and everyone jumps on him, but a jealous Safy takes the front spot. After making sure she's no longer sick, he opens the front door to show a huge supply of edibles and wine. He reveals he was on his way back when everyone was giving him free things because he's the good doctor in town. Skaty returns with a bag of dragon dumplings, and Mermaid also comes with the boss and the workers carrying a barrel of wine. With more food than they know what to do with, Glenn decides to throw a party for everyone. At night, as the girls continue their own competition of who will win Glenn over, they notice that the new challenger, Skaty, might ruin their chances of getting laid. Just then, Glenn approaches Skaty and thanks her for everything, and she thanks him back for saving her life. She also admits she now sees the world differently and has started enjoying living again, and she wouldn't have done it if it weren't for him. Just as Skaty snuggles up to him, Safy suddenly pulls him away with her tail and starts scolding him for hoeing around. She then starts to get freaky with him, but is quickly stopped by Tessalia and Arania, who also want their share. Amid their chaos, Skaty slips away with Glenn, but the girls catch up and pin him down, making him smile, knowing that he's well respected and loved in this city. Do you also want to get freaky with monster girls? Let us know in the comments. And if you like this video, watch this next one on screen.